Okay, I think maybe I'll get started, and people will be joining as they do. Um, so, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Kevin Fisher. I'm the Director of Policy, Data, and Analytics at AVAC, and I'm joined here with my colleague Jess Salzwedel, who is Program Manager for Research Engagement, and will be facilitating and presenting in this webinar. And Jessica is, I think, no stranger to many of you. It works in developing innovative tools for community engagement, including around the good participatory practice guidelines that were developed by UNAIDS and AVAC. So what we're going to do is we're going to have people to place their questions in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end of the questions, and we're going to maybe limit questions for the first two presenters until the end, so we can actually have an opportunity to engage with this incredible panel we have for you. So I'm going to begin by presenting an overview of HIV cure research funding and the landscape. So just to begin, this is work that AVAC and the International AIDS Society has done since 2013. We annually send out surveys to, and this year, to 215 potential funders of cure research to understand who is funding HIV cure research. It builds upon work that we've already been doing for over a decade in looking at HIV prevention research tracking, which is a report that AVAC puts out every year. And we'll shortly put out the data for 2020. How we do this is we look at research in different scientific focal areas, which is a kind of an amalgam of both the definition of cure research developed by the NIH's Office of AIDS Research, but additionally to the scientific priorities identified by the International AIDS Society. And these include these are some of the focal areas you can see. It's a wide range of different areas that could have benefit for cure research, including things like therapeutic vaccines, but also research into viral reservoirs and gene and cell therapies, all very active areas, as you know. So here is just a snapshot of the investment over since 2013, and you will note that that after years of really large increases, the funding is somewhat flat funded over the last 3 years, though, and the last year was the smallest increase from year to year, from 2019 to 2020, and we're now at 337 million US dollars invested in cure research in 2020, which I guess reflects maybe an investment of approximately $10 per person living with HIV globally. And here's a distribution of the countries in which their investment. You will see that the United States invests the lion's share of investment, and it's the largest investment principally through the NIH. But I would just also note that there's a number of countries that have consistently made important investments, notably France through the ANRS, and Canada and Australia. These investments are very important, and it is notwithstanding their smaller amounts, because they create a research environment in which a number of different researchers are working in different areas and then can collaborate. I would also note that there has been an increasing amount of philanthropic investment by philanthropies, most notably by AMFAR and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but also AIDS Fonds, Institut Pasteur, and the Wellcome Trust have also made investments in cure research. And although these investments totaled just $10 million in 2020, it's a growing area. Once again, a place where investments are really creating an environment where other additional investors. So I just wanted to say that notwithstanding the flat funding, there has been a recent investment, which we're going to hear about shortly from Carl Salzwedel, from the NIH into the Martin Delaney collaboratories, and this will be obviously an important investment, and will be reflected in the 2021 survey that we do. I just want to say that too that the collaboratories are part of, or one of a number of cure research has lent itself to a number of really important collaboratories, and they include also ones that have been funded through AMFAR, through the Dutch NL4, and then and additionally, there's another one, and I've forgotten it right now, so I apologize. But it's an important area. Where so, with that said, I'm going to, as I said, mention that we're going to put questions in the chat, and we'll address them later. Though I will say that one question that we got early on was how we can ensure that all countries continue to invest in cure research. And I think the most important way that I think right now is to highlight that work and the importance of that work, and make sure that so that the countries, even though they may be putting $2 million in or even less, that they have some sense that they're contributing to the global cure research. And so the way advocates do is highlight that research and support those researchers. So that's the way. So I'd like to move over to Dr. Salas-Weddle, and to have him talk. He is the chief of pathogenesis, and basic research branch of the NIAID Division of AIDS, and he oversees a broad portfolio of grants, including the Martin Delaney Collaboratories, which you'll hear about, for HIV cure research, and the Centers for AIDS Research, the CFAR program. So it's a real treat to have him talk. And so I don't know if Carl, if you're ready now to be able to. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. There's they have a transition there, so I don't know if Carl, if you're ready to. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin, and thanks for the invite to talk today. Does everything look and sound okay here?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, good. So I'm going to talk a little bit about funding investment in the cure space from the NIAID perspective, and also talk more about the collaboratory program. But just to start, just as a reminder why we think HIV cure is important, we have over 37 million people globally living with HIV, and delivering therapy, although we have great therapies now available, not everyone has access to those, and sustaining treatment of 37 million people for their lifetime on ART is just not a practical strategy. There's also, as we know, tremendous challenges in retention and care, and keeping people fully suppressed, keeping their virus fully suppressed, especially in the United States. You know, some of those European companies countries that Kevin's talking about, they're much better. They have universal health care, and so they're much better able to stay on top of treatment, and their treatment cascade is not as severe. Unfortunately, in the United States, we have a treatment problem. We have a healthcare problem, and also in many low resourced areas of the world, keeping people on effective therapy is a challenge. And also, you know, treating people lifelong on antiretroviral therapy, there's always the potential for some low level of drug resistance. There are some toxicities that people experience. And most importantly, it's really the stigma of living with HIV, having to divulge, you know, to your partners that you're HIV positive, and to be able to cure individuals would really be important. So in terms of funding at NIAID, funding has been relatively flat over the last 12 years or so. But when we look at cure-focused funding, there's been really a dramatic increase around the time of the start of the Martin Delaney Collaboratory Program until recently. And as Kevin indicated, also with their global data, there is a little bit of a leveling off in recent years. But I think that has more to do with the fact that we're reaching a point in which we're doing everything, more or less everything that we can. This has resulted in a dramatic increase in the number of publications that we're seeing over the last, compared to 20 years ago, with over 500 publications each year in the area of HIV cure research. And also this basic research is translating to really a huge number of clinical trials funded both by the NIH, but also by other global partners, with over 92 interventional trials ongoing as tracked by TAG, as well as 38 observational studies. And you see the long list of different interventions that are being studied. We're really, if you think about it in comparison to the antiretroviral therapy days, we're really kind of at the AZT phase, where we're looking at these interventions mostly individually, and we're seeing some hints of signal, for example, with the broadly neutralizing antibodies, but they're relatively short-lived. And so as we start to study more of these interventions and optimize them and then combine them, we think that much like with triple drug or dual drug antiretroviral therapy, we'll get to a point where we have longer term durable remissions in individuals. We're buoyed in our investment in HIV cure research by the examples that we have from individuals that received bone marrow transplant as a result of having cancer, as well as being living with HIV. We all know that the Berlin patient, as well as Adam Castillo, the London patient that was introduced to us a few years ago. Sadly, these patients, in order to need a bone marrow transplant, have really severe cancer disease. And so tragically, many other individuals that have undergone transplants with CCR5 negative or HIV resistant cells, as these individuals, many of them succumb to their cancer. So it's a great success for a small number of individuals, but we obviously need to broaden out our curative strategies to something that's much safer and scalable. We've also learned in the last few years from treatment interruption trials that many individuals just receiving ART, when you stop their therapy, are able to control virus. Their immune system's able to control virus for a variable lengths of time. So a few years ago in the CHAMP study, Namazi et al. Showed that looking at over 700 participants in various treatment interruption trials, that up to 13% of acutely infected individuals were able to control their virus for some length of time. About 55% maintained that control for 2 years, and about 20% maintained that for 5 years. We also just recently, really in the last year, have seen some really exciting examples of what could be potentially some spontaneous cures. So in Lorene Willenberg, a longtime elite controller, researchers have looked at her blood cells and are unable to find intact virus, even though she has never been on ART. So her immune system may have been able to completely fight off the infection. So this is exciting because it gives us proof of concept of what the immune system might be capable to do if we can just tweak it in the right ways. Also, the Esperanza patient from Argentina did receive ART early on, but she's controlled for 14 years without ART, controlled the virus. And again, also the same group of researchers were unable to find functional virus in that individual. So these proof of concepts really give us promise that it may be possible to come up with an effective therapy. So the Martin Delaney Collaboratories for HIV Cure Research Program has been around for 10 years now. It's the flagship NIH program on HIV cure, our largest investment, spanning basic, applied, and clinical research. So bringing all the whole spectrum of research into one program, and also bringing together multiple partners that otherwise might not work together. So multiple academic institutions, along with government and industry partners. Importantly, we think it's critical for interventions to be successful that we involve industry at the earliest stage. We've also brought in community partners with this last iteration, and I'll talk more about that later. And with this latest iteration of the program, we focused really on a three-pronged approach. We used to let the applicants propose whatever structure they wanted or strategy they wanted, but we've settled on in this third iteration that we want one component to focus on the basic research of reservoir biology. We think that the basic research is critical to continue to make sure that we learn as much as we can and don't overlook any potential targets. And then the other two research foci focus on developing strategies for controlling rebound, either through therapeutic intervention or through the immune system, or reducing the size of the reservoir with the ultimate goal of a classic cure or eradication of HIV. We think it's important for this flagship program, for this large investment that we're making, that we cover all the bases. It used to be that some collaboratories would focus more on immunologic strategies for remission and others would focus on eradicating the reservoir. We want everyone that receives one of these grants to tackle both, because we don't know which will be successful. Likely the remission will be successful in the shorter term, but we want to keep a focus on the ultimate goal of a classic cure. And this program is named for Martin Delaney, a longtime advocate, who sadly died of liver cancer in 2009, but he was a huge proponent for HIV cure research. So the program started off in 2011 with the 3 grants shown in green here: Defeat HIV, DARE, and CARE. And then in 2016, we doubled the size of the program and added 3 other collaboratories: I4C, Believe, and Beat HIV. I just want you to note here, you can see the principal investigators listed, and in these first 2 iterations, for the first 10 years, we've had only male principal investigators. So I'll come back to that in a moment. So as Kevin mentioned, in August, Dr. Fauci announced the large investment in HIV cure research with an expansion of the Martin Delaney Collaboratory Program and the addition of 1 collaboratory focused exclusively on HIV cure research in pediatric populations, because pediatric individuals are looking at a lifetime of living with HIV. So the impact of a cure would be greatest in these individuals. And they also have a unique immune system that's relatively naive and maybe more amenable to certainly to immunologic control of HIV. And he pointed out that, it's been 40 years now, as of this summer, that we've been living with this pandemic in the United States. But even though we've made remarkable progress in therapy and prevention, we really need to keep pressure on developing a cure. So there's a commitment at the institute level and cure research. This just shows the funding at each iteration of the program. The red line indicates the number of grants. So in the first iteration, we invested $70 million over 5 years into 3 grants. We more than doubled that in 2016 with an investment of $154 million into six grants. And then this August, we expanded that another 75% to a total investment of $269 million over 5 years in 10 different collaboratory grants. This is the way I envision the Martin Delaney Collaboratories. It's really built on 4 pillars of partnerships: academia, industry, community, and government. So the community pillar was admittedly the weakest from the start. The first iteration of the program, there was no mention of community. I inherited the program, and in discussions with my colleagues that are involved in the ACTG and were involved with the development of antiretroviral therapy, they educated me on the importance of involving community at the earliest stages of research. And so in the second iteration, we required a CAB and also a cross MDC CAB, where you have representatives from each individual CAB. And that was really the first formal involvement of CAB as a partner, or the community as a partner in the program. But we realized that there was some frustration among the community in not being able to resource community engagement adequately. And so hopefully we've solved that problem here with this third iteration, where we formally made a requirement for community partners in the program so that we can really have a true 4 strong pillars supporting the program. And we'll have more about that, I'm sure, from our panelists. Just to point out that it's not just an NIAID funded program, it's funded by 7 different institutes now. The 3 in yellow were added with this current iteration. This shows, excuse me, the location of the 10 current collaboratories, the ones with asterisks are the new ones. And I just want to point out also the PAVE grant at Johns Hopkins, which is the pediatric focused collaboratory. And so coming back to the principal investigators, again, as I said, in the first 10 years, we had nothing but male principal investigators. Now we have 10 of the 25 PIs are female. So we're getting a little bit closer to equity with the next iteration, and we're very happy about that. So just to summarize my last slide, some of the changes that we made with the third iteration of the program is that we removed clinical trials. So clinical trials were allowed in the second iteration. However, we noticed that clinical trials take a huge amount of resources and a huge amount of effort and planning and infrastructure. And so they ended up being a huge distraction for the collaboratories, and in fact, probably slowed down some of the basic research. So we've moved back to basics with the basic research focus. We developed a partnership with the ACTG to take on small cure-focused clinical trials. We introduced the requirement to both pursue eradication as well as control, and made the community partnerships a formal component. And then also, as I mentioned, we have one pediatric focused collaboratory. So that's all I have to present, and thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Carl. Really appreciate that. And I guess we're gonna now transition to the panel, but I wanted to see if people had questions in the chat, or there's a Q&A option. I wanted to give people an opportunity to raise their hand and see if they have a question they wanted to raise, either for Carl or myself on the resource tracking work. But seeing none, you're ready. I think you're ready to transition, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I do see one hand up, but
oh, really? Okay, good. Yeah, but I didn't see that. Sorry.
But it seems like some of the questions are coming in. So can we highlight some of the most significant findings from previous NDC groups is a question that came in, and I think that we'll be able to talk about that throughout the conversation with Carl. But before we maybe get into some of the highlights, maybe I'll bring in some of our panelist voices. So first, we have Dazan Dixon Diallo, who is the founder and president of Sister Love. Dazan has been in the field of HIV and sexual and reproductive health for over 36 years. You know, her previous research projects have included working with HIV positive women and violence prevention, working with women at high risk for HIV, working with adolescents and offenders to understand how their alcohol and drug use is related to risky sexual behavior, and determining successful strategies for community involvement in HIV vaccine and microbicide research. You know, we're really excited to have Dazan here, and she will talk about it in a minute, but she is also, the Sister Love is the community partner for the Erase collaboratory, which, as you saw from Carl's slides, are one of the newest collaboratories. So also here from Erase is Dr. Diana Culpa, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine in the School of Medicine at Emory University, and a researcher in the Division of Microbiology and Immunology at the Yerkes National Primate Center, and associate director of the Virology and Molecular Biomarkers Core for the Center for AIDS Research at Emory. And as Carl showed, she, along with PIs Dr. Mirkos Peridini and Guido Silvestri, is also the PI of the Erase collaboratory, which stands for Enterprise for Research and Advocacy to Stop and Eradicate HIV. So we'll get into the name in just a minute. So we're excited to have Dr. Culpa as well. And then, you know, then we also have Josephine Nabukenya joining us as well. She is a Ugandan advocate for both HIV cure and PMTCT. You know, her work has focused on educating and mobilizing young people around their involvement in research, both in cure and, like I said, in PMTCT. She's an Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric Fellow, and also is one of 3 inaugural 2020 IS AVAC HIV Cure Fellows, so has been doing this project of getting people involved in research for the last year and a half really intensely, and also is a youth and peer coordinator at the Makerere University in Uganda. And we're very excited to have Josephine join us as well. So I am going to start off the discussion actually with you, Dr. Culpa, just because I think I had mentioned to you earlier, the erase name includes the word advocacy. And I think as Carl sort of talked about the story and the history there, community has evolved and has become more incorporated, and erase actually is included in its name. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit both about the erase program, but also how you came up with the name erase.
So yeah, thank you, and good morning to everyone. So as you mentioned, we are very fortunate to have Dazan as a sister love as a part of our collaboratory. And you know, it started when we started to put together the collaboratory and looking at recruiting investigators and our private partners, and I went to our CFAR and, you know, asked about, because we have a community liaison council through the Emory CFAR, and knew there would be a wealth of information from them on who in the community may be interested in partnering with us. And Dazan's name came up, and Sister Love, you know, we all kind of got together, and I was so enthusiastic to, the first time I met Dazan, I was like, okay, this is gonna happen. So we're very, very excited to, you know, to partner with them. And in fact, we started having conversations about, like, you know, how can we work together even if the collaboratory doesn't happen? Because it's something that's, I think, very important. I think the role of the community partner in HIV research has historically been important, but I think that it's very, very nice to see it moving into becoming formally involved with the Martin Delaney collaboratories, given the role they have in HIV cure research at this time. So to me, the A having standing for advocacy is a very natural part of what we're building in our collaboratory. And as I mentioned, like, you know, the first conversation I ever had with Dazan, I was all on board, 100%, let's go.
Great, so maybe Dazan, I think this is a great transition. I mean, you have been advocating for community partnerships as a model for some time, and it obviously are a leader in that in the HIV prevention field. So can you talk a little bit about the community program that you're thinking about with Erase?
Yep. I did my selfie mic check. I sounded fine. Thanks for that question, Jessica. And thank you, Deanna, for that recognition. And certainly, we're so excited to be a part of this. We're calling it an adventure, not just a venture, but we're really excited for the journey that we have begun with our partners at Emory with Erase. And I will say, to take some of the teeny bit of the credit, if I was in another life, Jessica, I would actually be making lots of money in marketing and communications, because I'm pretty much a moniker maven. So I love to make sure that what we're doing is easily translated and represented in what we call ourselves, so that no matter who is on the receiving end of our engagement and our information, that they can immediately connect to it, and that they can, to some degree, understand within a name what we're about and what we're doing. And I'm so grateful that we were able to incorporate advocacy, because that really is what we're doing. In addition to, of course, doing the important work of the science and returning to basics. And I want to thank Carl for also being one of those leaders in science who listens and learns and pivots and incorporates things that are learned, especially from the community voices. So thanks for that history and that tale, or that story of the evolution of how the community partnerships and engagement have become a part of the collaboratory enterprise. But what we're excited about is a couple of things in addition to the science that we are all learning with and from, is that we're using this as an opportunity to really figure out how to define and to determine the role and the value and the power of engaging community in every level and the entire spectrum of HIV research at large, but also specifically in terms of cure research from bench to bodies, right? We are wanting to show that once, and I think Kevin alluded to this a bit, but once you engage folks from the very beginning, from the compound design, from the molecule, all the way to the actual drug, product, or medication or device that ends up in bodies, that the community has been so ingrained and a part of that process all along, that by the time you get to phase 3 clinical studies, we're not dealing with the same kinds of challenges that we're usually addressing because community is only brought in after the fact. So that's the first thing that I think is really, really important about what we're hoping to achieve. But also what we want to do is make sure that we're not only building capacity within community to understand some of this basic science and how to involve and make their voices clear and heard in terms of their own lived experiences and what they understand from it, but to also help researchers improve their own capacities to understand community and to recognize and respect the value and the power that the lived experiences and the ideas and even some of the creativity that community can bring to try to the design of a study, all the way to how we talk about the study. When we sat in our kickoff meeting, for example, the first thing that came to my mind is that, and we had a new person who started, our community engagement coordinator started that day of our kickoff. And I kept trying to check in with her just to make sure that her eyes hadn't rolled into the back of her head, because there's so much complicated science that's coming into this. And it could sound like a drone after a while, you know, like the teacher's voice on Charlie Brown. And what we want to do is help our research partners be able to have that same conversation about that science in a way that actually makes a lot of sense and is completely palatable and understandable by our community. So we're really, really excited about being the bridge between these, what I consider two communities. The research, our research partners are a community of researchers, and the folks that we work and live with every day as advocates or people living with HIV our community as well. So what we're doing is bridging community with this type of partnership, and we're super excited about it.
Great. I mean, you said so many really great things that I'm going to pick up on, I think, throughout the conversation. But the first piece, and I think this is a great opportunity to bring Josephine in, is this idea of the translation and ensuring that, I mean, cure can be a new language. I mean, there were just a few terms that we heard before: eradication, elite controller, that are not sort of in our everyday language when it comes to prevention or treatment. And I think that can be a difficult thing to sort of bring people in. And Josephine has been doing this work of bringing in not just any population, but young people into the conversation, and trying to help them both understand, but really be a strong influence into the research. So Josephine, I would love you to just spend a little time maybe talking about what you've been doing, bringing in youth into the conversation as well in Uganda.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And as she has introduced me, my name is Josephine Kenya. And I'm happy to say that my YAP's name is Jojo, and I'll be explaining why I'm called Jojo. So I'm blessed. I've been blessed with a platform to interact with young people. Definitely, growing up with HIV at my age, we didn't have so many young people like to look up to give us peer support and all that. So we're all just trying to figure it out. What is peer support? How do you support your fellow other young people? But currently, I am in a position where I am looked at as a role model for young people. So definitely that challenged me to have information about several things, about different things in the HIV world, including HIV cure. And that's how I developed the interest in knowing about HIV cure. And definitely at first, it was a lot of information and a lot of science. But it has broken down through the different discussions that I had with different people and also in different workshops. And I realized there was need to disseminate this information, but not to disseminate it as a clinician, to disseminate it as an HIV, advocate. And that's how I came up with a group of other young people. We went through the cure information, sorry about that. And we had to go through some of these medical terms. What do they mean? How can we simplify these? How can we simplify these statements? When I say reservoir, what does it mean in the medical language? After understanding the medical language, then I'll get to have in the community language, how can someone, sorry about that, how can someone relate to a reservoir? So that, with such discussions, we simplified some of those terms from saying reservoir to saying hiding place, from saying, CD4 to saying white blood cells, just to simplify this language for all these young people to fully understand what is happening around HIV cure research. Because before you get into the studies that are happening, you need to first understand the basic information around HIV cure research. And definitely, when you look at the work that I did with Series of JoJo, you realize that I would not go through the health workers alone. I had to meet the youth peers at the health facilities, because these are the same people that are entrusted by their docents, by their fellow young people. So they need to be empowered. They need to know what information to give out. So all the trainings that we conducted were mainly focusing the youth peers that work at the health facilities, because they interact with young people, so they need to be empowered with information that they can easily give out to their fellow young people. So that was all about the Series of JoJo, simplifying the information and delivering it to youth peers who would in the long run deliver it to the general community of young people living with HIV.
Great. And so the Series of JoJo is it's both a social media platform with a series of videos to sort of explain both HIV cure and viral load testing and all the sort of major components that go into cure. And maybe Josephine, you can put that into the chat so that others can view it as well. But we did have a number of questions. Yeah. We did have a number of questions that came in during the registration, and I do want to pick up on some of those threads, and quite a few of them focused on this idea of coordination and the opportunities for collaboration. Obviously, the collaboratory itself has expanded, and there's scientific collaboration that can happen, but there's also collaboration that can happen now, I think, really robustly at the national level between community partners. Dazan, you are a community partner at Erase, and AVAC is a community partner for PAVE, I4C, as well as REACH, so to two of the new collaboratories and one returning. So maybe I would love to hear, Dazan, your sort of ideas on what you think about collaboration really at this national level and how we can bring more groups into the fold.
Absolutely. And hopefully from our standpoint, we might be able to be an example at the local level of how this might be mirrored or replicated at the national level. One of the core pieces, two things actually that we're doing, is we're looking to upend how we deal with community engagement first and foremost. And there's a longer conversation. I know Mitchell and I haven't had a chance to sit down and talk about it, but there's this longer conversation about some of the ideas we have for updating in a 21st century model of GPP, right? And the good participatory practice. A part of that is it is time for us, and this is where I think a national conversation amongst all of the community partners within the collaboratories can have, is how important it is to finally bring community engagement into community. Community engagement should be in, with, by, for, about community. It has a different flavor when it lives at the academic institution or when it lives at a research site. And so we want to, we're using this as an opportunity to show what happens when community engagement is fully owned as a fully participating partner with our research partnerships and the institutions that are conducting the actual studies. The other thing that we're adding in that's a little different, I think, is we are not creating a community advisory board. We have 3 A's that we're focused in on when it comes to community partnering. One at the first is accountability, but there's also advisory and there's also advocacy, that those things come together. And so our body that we're hoping to share is what we're calling a community organized leadership, advisory, accountability, or advocacy, whichever A fits in a given model. For us, it's accountability board, so that there's a different relationship and there's a different understanding of the authority and the autonomy that comes from an advisory group, such as what we have worked to develop. And the third component to this is that we are also going to be bringing together different periodic opportunities to meet with other community advisory groups that are engaged with other HIV research. So whether it's a VTN CAB or a PTN CAB or other community groups that are directly engaged in HIV research through the CFARs, that we want to have meetings together where we're learning bench science, we're learning from each other what the community engagement looks like at a clinical level, at implementation, so that there's a continuum of this conversation. And I'm hopeful that when we come together as national community partners in the collaboratory, that we can do the same with other national and global CABs that currently exist with regard to HIV research.
Great. Apologies, I had a bit of an internet issue, so you see I had to change locations. But I think that, this question that came in, I think that you spoke to it really beautifully, and I think we have a very similar model. What, Carl had mentioned, which is really nice about this model, is that the community partnership allows for engagement in the community, and the CAB allows for advisory. And so there really can be this beautiful space of allowing for a following of a protocol all the way through, from the basic science, like you said, this real GPP approach, and move all the way through into the clinical trial space in ACTG. And I think that we can, our approach is very similar in creating structures to allow for that growth all the way through, and then allowing that advocacy arm to build, because if you have champions in the community who understand, like Josephine, and can help others bring into the conversation, there's real opportunity to diversify the voices. And I wanna bring this back to you, Dr. Kulpa, as well. As a researcher, this is basic science. This is not always in bodies, it's in non-human primates. What opportunities do you see for community to input into this research at this early phase that can help, shape the direction that it's going in?
I actually see it in a couple of different ways, and I will pull from it in a recent example of what we've seen over the past couple of years with COVID-19, in that that to me has really emphasized the importance of scientists talking to non-scientists as much as they talk to other scientists. I was very fortunate to have spent some time working with Dr. Rafiq Sekali, and when I was working with him, he was basically the first person who introduced to me the idea that if you're a scientist and all you're doing is talking to other scientists and not engaging with the community and not educating the community, if not learning from the community, what are you doing? And so much of my training had been centered around this idea of, you're in a lab, you're focused on your next experiment, your next project, your next paper, your next grant, and relating all of that to anybody outside of the scientific community was just, was sort of a why question. But I think that it's what I said. I was very fortunate to work with Rafiq, who said, no, this is actually a part of what we need to do. And so we would organize activities where we would have, a panel of scientists who would just, go into a community center and have a panel discussion where we would invite whoever wanted to come and ask questions and say, like, what are you doing? And how do you make sure, as Josephine was saying, that when you're talking to people, you can relay information to them in a way that makes sense, and you're not talking at some sort of like, you're just using a bunch of jargon that is not, something that people can easily digest. And I think that's a skill that scientists need to develop in themselves, is to, to be able to have, the ability to communicate. But it's also so important because it gives a sense of, as I was just mentioning with COVID-19, you know, we were learning as we were going, and we had to basically see how information changed in real time. And as a scientist, I was really comfortable with that. I was like, well, of course, we learn new things. We need to change directions. We went, but it was very clear to me that a lot of people aren't comfortable with that. And so to be able to bring in a larger dialogue of how the scientific process works, I think would actually give more confidence in how in the scientific process, in how we actually are going to get someplace in terms of there is progress, we are learning, we are getting there. And but also to be able to, as Azan was saying, inform scientists on how the community is thinking about what we're doing, and does it even make sense in terms of a translatable clinical application that we want to get to ultimately. And so I guess that's what we're hoping to get out of this. And I think, given what we have, the relationship we have with Dazon so far, we'll hit it.
Great. So I've mentioned this in the chat, but we do want to open up questions for everybody. So if you do have a question, feel free to place it in the chat or the Q&A, or raise your hand to come into the conversation. So while people are formulating their questions, both you mentioned COVID-19, and I think it's sort of an interesting perspective. Obviously, from the science is evolving, but the collaboratories officially kicked off August 16th of 2021 in the middle of a pandemic that's really showing the inequity that is in the world. And we also have to now do the job of bringing more people into the fold to diversify the conversation. So I'm wondering, really, from all of you, to think about how do we ensure trust in this process and bring bring more people into this conversation that is happening right now. And I guess, like you said, just thinking about the pandemic, it's just really reminded me this need to bring people into the trusting fold of science. So that's really an open question for the field. Maybe I'll start with you, Josephine. How do you think we can continue to build trust in the process?
Thank you so much. Definitely, when you talk of trust, that calls for more than one party. And definitely that will get back to our request, or what we've been always talking about: involvement of everyone in the discussion, involvement of everyone in the meetings, in the workshops, to understand what is happening around QR research, what is happening around the funding itself towards QR research. So as long as people are involved, even if probably does not go as expected, but as long as they are involved, they'll trust the process, they'll trust even the risks involved, and they'll just take it up.
Great. Well, I think that what you also said too about this idea of bringing in risk, something that we didn't sort of contextualize in this conversation is that HIV cure, even though it's a little bit further off, there are a number of clinical trials that are happening, and there is already a dialogue about sort of how people are interacting with these trials, and it is sort of a new way to think about it, because the person at risk of acquiring HIV is not the person in the trial, right? So I think there's a lot of issues that, as you mentioned, Josephine, that we are going to have to bring in now to ensure trust in the process later on. And we had a great question from Richard, and I think that this is an important one. How can people get involved in this process? Or any of the Martin Delaney collaboratories looking for community advisory board members? As Carl mentioned, there are 6, I believe, new collaboratories. So I'm sure that there are some. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about ways to get involved in this process, because I think that there's more than just a community advisory board.
Right. No, I was very excited by this question. Thanks, Richard, for sending it in. There are 2 things I would say about that. One is that for us, we are there will be several different ways that people can get involved, right? Our collab, that's what we call our board. It's actually the Community Organized Leadership Advisory Board. So it is called a collab in and of itself, which I think just that's my monikering that happens. I made that a verb. But one of the other activities that we're planning for at some point in the course of the study or this particular grant period, is that we're hoping to engage at least once a year what we're calling the research marketplace. And that's a place where we're going to be able to bring together community advisory board members from all of the different research disciplines, whether it's basic, translational, clinical, social behavioral, implementation, as well as community-led research, and for those who are doing some of the structural research issues, which I think could also address some of those dynamics that you talked to, Jessica, around the disparities in the distributive justice issues with COVID-19 vaccines, right? So this, I think, is a really important opportunity, and I love the idea of coming together with one sort of directory, if you will, on who's involved in all of these different advisory and accountability groups, so that community has a contact point and a way to directly engage, whether geographically in terms of their own community or within a discipline or within an interest. So I love the question, because the question turns into an idea, and that's something that we would think seriously about incorporating into this research marketplace that we want to develop with our other community partners that are involved in the collaboratories.
Great, and I think, you know, we are the same. We have both opportunities for community advisory boards, but also opportunities to engage across. As I mentioned, AVEC is the community partner for I4C, PAVE, which is the pediatric collaboratory, and REACH. And we have opportunities to engage through the ROAR program for advocacy, as well as, like I mentioned, just sort of different projects to get involved in. And we are also planning sort of a similar ideas around, you know, a symposium. So I think that there are many ways to get involved in this idea of a list. I think is a great one as well, and something that we can take forward with the NIH here. I think in addition, you know, there was a great question that sort of came in through the Q&A, and how can we encourage scientists to start relating their research to the community as opposed to just thinking about their next project or grant. And I think that this is sort of a great question for you, Deanna, to maybe take on for the group.
I think that is a great question, because, you know, and to be completely transparent, I think that there are a lot of scientists who, if you were to ask them, you know, about that, are they going to immediately see value in it? Because there's so much in the science world about, like you said, like thinking about your next project, your next grant. So in order to, like, there's a couple of things. Like, one, I think actually incorporating a community partner relationship within the collaboratories is an excellent way to do that, because in a way, you know, you have the people who are like already on board who want to be a part of that, and you also have the people who are like, okay, why do I need to do that? You bring them into a relationship, and guess what? You're going to see why it's important. You're going to see why it matters. And, you know, and through that exposure to it, I think that actually is going to bring more people around to the idea of this is important, this matters. And what I think is interesting is that when we have recruitment of graduate students for, you know, prospective students who are coming in, and they're, you know, we're talking to them, this is one aspect where new students who are, you know, the first year graduate students, they're actually excited about this idea. When I mentioned that our collaboratory has a relationship with, you know, community advocacy group here in Atlanta, so many times I hear, how do I get involved in that? Like, how did you get involved in that? How do we do that? I think that there is a lot of interest in the next generation of scientists to be a part of that. Right from the beginning, which I thought was really exciting to keep hearing that question over and over. How did you do that? You know, how does every lab have that? You know, they want to know how they can be involved in that same way. And I think, so bringing that up as an option, as something that, you know, is possible to think about, will get people, you know, first of all, the people who are like on board will be right there. And then following along behind them will be the people who see there's value in that, and that's important to do. And you may not have thought about it before, but now that you've been exposed to it, you'll see it and you'll get there.
Thank you. And I think, maybe to close out on this forward-looking approach, the beauty of collaboratory in this iteration is that it is resourcing engagement and calling it a pillar at the same level and putting it on the same stance as the scientific progress, that the two go hand in hand. And, we mentioned at the beginning of the call, all of these other collaboratories, not all of them have the same level of commitment of community as a partner in this way. And so I think maybe as some closing thoughts for the group, I'd love to hear you all think about what do you hope the benefit of this partnership will be? Where do you hope that this will go? And I'm just going to start from the beginning. So maybe Dr. Kulpa, then Deanna, and then Josephine.
Do you want me to start? Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. Where do you hope to see this partnership? Yeah.
So I guess just to, exactly what I just said, which is to help other scientists see the value in how important this is to engage the community, and to be able to learn how to communicate their science, why it's important to communicate their science. And again, there's people who are already going to be on board, but to have exposure to all the people who haven't even thought about it yet or don't understand the value of it, I think that's a huge thing that this collaboratory is doing for science. And I'd love to see more of it in other places as well.
Great. Dezan, last thoughts on this?
I concur with Deanna. I think that what I hope most is that we are able, across all the collaboratories and the community partnerships, is to really demonstrate what we've been arguing for, which is the value in investing in community, in basic science and throughout the entire research enterprise, particularly with regard to cure. The other hope is that I think it should drive more community interest in cure research, and to also go beyond the interest of people living with HIV in cure research, but to understand for people across a whole lot of different chronic conditions that don't yet have cures, that they see the important value of engaging community, because other disease states do not have this level of community involvement. And so I'm hoping that we're able to, like Deanna said, go beyond our own enterprise and show the value of investing in community across a lot of different disease states, because most of those issues are impacting the same people disproportionately. And so there's an issue of justice that we also hope to elevate in this work in our partnerships. And I think that we're on the right path to do that.
Great. Josephine, any last thoughts for you?
Yes, thank you. Definitely, I agree with the two presenters or speakers. And I want to say that when we say involving community, let us also be a bit specific, because if it is a study or if it is research that is looking at young people, definitely young people should be involved. If we are talking of a community advisory board for a study that is involving young people, I would expect a youth advisory board. So as we say involvement of community, let us be specific to ensure that we have the right people on such platforms.
Great.
So
thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so thank you all so much for your time and your expertise today.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you, the panelists, Dina and Dezan and Josephine and Jess, for just a great panel discussion. And thank you all for joining. And this webinar will be, if you want to share it, will be has been recorded and will be available if you want to share it. And really appreciate all of your time today. A great discussion. So thank you so much.